Hi, I'm Jay from Fan Mom Studio, and I like to recycle K-pop albums. As a photocard collector, I know how easy it is to acquire extra albums, and I didn't want mine just sitting around unused. I definitely didn't want to throw them away, so now I'm on a mission to recycle them, cover to cover, and I'm sharing with you so that maybe you can too. Some people get nervous about this first, very necessary step, tearing the album apart. But I find that if I crack the spine thoroughly first, the pages usually come out clean and whole. But if any of them do tear, it's often salvageable. And honestly, it's just paper. Getting past your fear of messing up or your anxiety of tearing an album apart is the first step towards making something beautiful. My motto on album recycling is cover to cover. And we're going to start by taking that very literally. Album cover binder pages have become one of my favorite things to make. Some of them require more work than others, but Ateez's Will album is perfectly A5 binder sized. I only have to cut off the spine and create the holes. I always use binder pages in the front and back of my photocard binders, especially if the binder I'm using has pockets or deco on the covers. It's just a little extra protection for the pages and the photocards that sit in the front. I've also had someone suggest that these album covers in particular would be great for dividing eras within a binder. You can see how I'm fussing a little bit over this perfectly straight edge, but it really doesn't require that level of precision. I hold myself to high standards because I sell many of my products. I'm far more casual about things that I make for myself. Now it's time to make the holes. I always have blank binder pages on hand for making collages. Another good option for a guide would be a pocket page or a backboard from your binder. In that case, you might need a marking utensil to show you where the holes will go. For my template, I just use washi tape and attach it directly to the cover. It comes cleanly off both the cover and the cardstock in the end. You do not need a fancy tool for this next step. This is a cheap, ordinary hole punch. It goes right through the thick cover very cleanly. They also make 6-hole punches that wouldn't even require you to use a template. But I don't believe in buying specialty tools when I can get the job done with what I have. I owned this hole punch long before I started recycling K-pop albums, and I don't see any need to replace it yet. And that's all there is to it. This beautiful page is ready to go in an A5 6-ring binder. It's subtle, but it's lovely, and it was easy. Once I'm ready for the pages, I almost always start with bookmarks. Not every page in an album will be suitable for bookmarks. I like my bookmarks to be 2 inches wide. Any images wider than that are better suited for other project types. One of the reasons that I like the paper cutter I use is because it already has the measurements on the cutter itself. I don't have any need to mark up my pages or use a separate ruler. I have even gotten fairly good at estimating where the center of the bookmark will fall. But when I first started, I often had to cut a little bit wide and then trim back down until I felt the image fell where I wanted it to. And there's nothing wrong with that. Even now, after all this practice, I will give it a little more space if I am in doubt. I can always go back in and cut the bookmark a little narrower. I cannot add the paper back on once it's already been cut. One of the reasons that I recycle K-pop albums is to reduce the waste created by the K-pop community. Even so, I cannot use every scrap of paper from an album. Sometimes my offcuts still have use in craft projects, but often the extra paper goes into the recycling bin. I couldn't have recycled an album without taking it apart. So even though it's not zero waste, it is less waste. And that matters. Most of the bookmarks I make have to be trimmed not only for width, but also for height. I like my bookmarks to be 6.5 inches tall. This size has been very functional whether someone is reading a large hardcover book or a smaller mass-market paperback. I have worked with albums that are not even 6.5 inches tall. In this case, I will usually let them remain at the full page height. I believe that the smallest bookmarks I have ended up making were approximately 5.5 inches tall. One of the important things that I have learned about making bookmarks is that when possible, I want space at the top. All of my bookmarks get tassels, and I don't particularly enjoy putting a hole through someone's forehead. Sometimes I don't get much choice. It depends on where the photo fell on the page. If the top of the idol's head is cut off on the original album page, there's nothing you can do. I will avoid photos like that when I can, but sometimes it's worth it. Especially if you need, say, one more so that all of your bookmarks have 2 images. That's right, my bookmarks are all double-sided. I like to use glue tape to glue the 2 halves of my bookmark together. I love that both sides of the bookmark look good this way. Sometimes the back side of the page that you've cut looks a little awkward. If you don't have enough album pages to do 2 sides for the bookmark, perhaps because you were only given a few pages, or because you wanted to share with a friend, it would also look nice to use a patterned paper for the backside. I have also used neutral images from the same album as backsides. If there's a landscape, or a band logo, or even a lyric page. I use glue tape for this step because there's no moisture or drying time. If you need to use a glue stick or liquid glue, make sure that you allow plenty of time for that glue to dry. Otherwise, things might be slipping around during the next step. After joining the 2 sides, I always trim the edges. To me, this is essential for a neat finish. It is very rare for me to have gotten the edges lined up perfectly. So not only will I be able to see a little bit of the other paper on the edges, my bookmark might no longer be square at the corners. I always try to cut as little as possible at this step. It is possible to over-trim and end up with an oddly skinny bookmark, but those bookmarks are still functional, so don't stress too much over perfection. You might notice that I always slide my blade back up so that I am drawing it towards me while trimming. When I am working with a single sheet of paper, I try to use my blade in both directions. This makes me less likely to dull one side of the blade before the other. But since I am going through 2 layers of paper at this step, there is additional drag. Since I'm working so close to the edge, I also have less room for error. I have found that pulling the blade towards me is just a little bit more stable under these conditions. Sometimes it still catches at the corners and tears a bit, but I'll be taking care of that during the next step. I round the corners on all of my bookmarks. Not only do I feel this gives them a more professional appearance, it also makes them last longer. Sharp corners on paper products are more prone to damage. Plus, the bookmarks I make are laminated. Sharp laminated corners are, well, sharp. They could damage you, or they could damage your book, and we definitely don't want that. My bookmarks are laminated in 2 steps. I use a very simple and affordable Amazon Basics laminator, and I use their brand of laminating pouches too. They make several sizes, but none of them are perfect for an individual bookmark. So for the first step, I put 4 to 5 bookmarks in the document size sleeve. They do sometimes move around during the laminating process. And if your bookmarks are 2 inches wide, then you will have very little room for error. If this makes you nervous, try 4 per sleeve first. As you can see, there's quite a bit of room in between them. Even if one had moved a little bit during the laminating process, they were very unlikely to touch each other, which is important because I need a little bit of space around the edge. Because these bookmarks are dual-sided, they are made of 2 pieces that could come apart. The laminate sticks to the surface of the paper, but the 2 pieces of paper do not always want to stick to each other, especially since the heat of the laminator sometimes breaks down the glue just a little bit. Thankfully, the laminate is also very good about sticking to itself, but it may not have done so during the first round of laminating. This means that when I trim down the bookmarks, I need to leave just a little bit of clear laminate around the edges. This will create the seal on the final product that will protect the images on the paper from moisture or oils on your hands. Some paper cutters can handle laminate, but the slide style type that I use really cannot. So I hand trim all of my bookmarks with a pair of very sharp scissors. And even if I change to a different style of paper cutter, I may continue to do so. I am very careful about the amount of laminate I leave on the edges of my bookmarks. If I leave too much, then I don't enjoy the look of the finished product. But if I don't leave enough, then the laminate will not be able to stick to itself at the edges. If the laminate cannot stick to itself, then the bookmark is at risk of falling completely apart. It has taken me quite a few trials and plenty of errors to figure out just where I like my bookmarks to be trimmed. I think that I would have a very hard time recreating that with a larger machine, especially since the best paper cutters for laminate are the swing arm style cutters. One small miscalculation with that, and I could cut through the entire bookmark. It is important to remember, if you're cutting by hand like I do, that repetitive motions, such as using scissors, can be very hard on your hands. When I am doing large batches of bookmarks, I make sure to take breaks. It's also important to know some gentle hand stretches. If you're a crafter, your hands can be one of your most valuable tools, and it's important to care for them as such. This step is definitely one of the longest in the bookmark making process, but it's still important to me to go slowly. By this point, I have already put a lot of work into these bookmarks, and it would be very easy to mess it up by being careless now. Finally, the bookmarks go through the laminator again for that all-important seal. I can fit them 3 at a time through this laminator. I check all the edges of every single bookmark, because it's quite common for them not to seal on the first pass. Every laminating machine is a little bit different, and I feel that mine, perhaps due to its age, doesn't always apply equal pressure. So I know that the bookmark in the middle is most likely to have an edge unsealed. This one is the perfect example. You can see how the 2 layers try to fully separate. When this happens, I'll move the bookmark to a different spot for its second run through the laminator. I believe that the most times I have ever had to run a single bookmark through is 5. That was one that I had cut just a little too close, but I stubbornly refused to give up, and somehow I got it to seal. Second and third passes through the laminator are not uncommon though, especially if the paper in the album is thicker than average. As far as I can tell, getting the perfect seal on the first try is mostly a matter of luck. That means this step requires a lot of patience and a lot of attention to detail. But if you do a good job, then the quality of the finished product will be completely worth it. I put these bookmarks through a lot, including letting my customers handle them at vendor events. They never end up with any damage worse than a few fingerprints. They're definitely designed to last. This finishing step is definitely optional, but because my bookmarks are a product that I sell, I wanted them to look like bookmarks that you would buy in a store. And that means I add tassels. I buy my tassels pre-made in bulk. But before I had an Etsy shop, and before I was into K-pop, I had a little bit of experience making bookmarks 1 or 2 at a time. Ribbon was my favorite way to finish these bookmarks, but it is possible to make individual tassels by hand. It definitely takes more time, but if you would prefer not to buy a bulk order of tassels only to use 1 or 2, it could be a better option. I use a 1/8 inch hole punch for this step, but if all you have is a standard 1/4 inch, you can also make that work. You may want to leave even more space at the top of your bookmarks if you're using a larger hole punch. And no matter what size hole punch you use, make sure that you don't get too close to the top edge. Otherwise, you could be creating a weak point where your bookmark could rip. Adding the tassel is super simple. You simply push the long loop through the hole that you have punched, slide the tassel through the loop, and pull it to secure. This type of tassel is not permanent, but personally, I prefer it that way because I put so much work into making my bookmarks durable. This tassel is probably the most delicate part of the entire finished product. I have once or twice needed to replace a tassel that got damaged. If for some reason you would prefer your tassel to be permanently attached to your bookmark, I would recommend a very small dot of fabric glue to attach the tassel to itself and not to the plastic of the bookmark. It is best for the tassel to be able to swing freely. That way it can be pulled to any side of the book that the reader needs. For this batch of bookmarks, I kept things simple and chose to use all black tassels. But with other concepts, I really enjoy having multiple colors. Choosing the best tassel color to go with the pictures can be so satisfying. I purchased large quantities of neutral colors like black, but when it comes to brighter hues, I enjoy buying variety packs. Sometimes I even end up surprised by what colors from the photo a tassel can pick up and enhance. Having many options on hand makes the process even more fun. And there you have it. 16 pages from an Ateez album have become 8 double-sided bookmarks, one for each Ateez member. I probably could have made more, but I have many other projects that I want to use this particular album for. If you enjoyed this tutorial video, please make sure you subscribe to the channel, because there will be more.